Just be here now.
So the theme of this particular retreat, suffering and grace, which we've been going through. The other night we had Ram Dass had a Thanksgiving satsang day at the church on the other side of the island, and Krishna Das and Ram Dass spoke about different aspects of suffering and grace, and I had found in a diary, and I think we can repeat this because not everybody was at the church. And the interesting thing about it is I got this from one of our satsang diaries. We're actually putting together all of our diaries, and we've gone and interviewed many of the people who were in India back when Ram Dass went back, and we followed him back to India in the early 70s. And it's all of our experiences finding Maharaji, being with him, and then coming back to the West. It's called Love Everyone, and it is going to see it's going to be published probably in a year and a half. And so we have been gathering all of these diaries. And this one particular diary that I found talked about Maharaji, and of course, Krishna Das, you'll have to remember this because it's in the diary, so it's absolute word of God that it happened, okay? Krishna Das kept
God knows.
What?
God knows.
God knows. Krishna Das, it's the gospel in this case of Girija, one of our satsang. Anyhow, in it, it talked about Maharaji Krishna Das kept a diary, like many of us did, and in it he would put different quotations that he would write down from different traditions. And so Maharaji, who supposedly didn't read English, pointed his finger at two particular quotes that he had put into his diary. We'll see if you remember. The first one was from Corinthians, from the Bible, 2 Corinthians. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations that was given to me, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for the strength is made perfect in the weakness. So that's, we talked about that, like I said, the other day, and Ram Dass hopefully will comment on that again. The other interesting quote that Maharaji pointed his finger at was from the Song of Mahamudra. You had put this passage from the Song of Mahamudra. If one sees not when staring into space, if with the mind one then observes the mind, one destroys distinctions and reaches Buddhahood. These two quotes he pointed out, and it was both in my diary and in Girija's, within the frame of this, darshan, which all the darshans were within 15 minutes, half hour, an hour. Do you remember this at all?
Yes. I remember it slightly different than you're telling it, but that's karma because this is the guy whose story I always tell wrong every time about how to meditate like Christ.
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay, Maharaji asked for my book, and he starts going through it, and in the book I had all kinds of prayers from all different traditions, and he kept going through and he stopped at this one page. And he says, what's this? And I looked, and it was this Buddhist prayer, this Vajrayana Buddhist prayer called the Song of Mahamudra. And I went, oh shit, a Buddhist prayer, and here I am. I looked it up and I said, well, it's Buddhist. Acha? He said, translate some. So Gurudat Sharma was there, one of his great old devotees, and he translated a few verses of it, and Maharaji looked at me and he said, Teak, which means correct, good. And I remember thinking, what? How could that be? And he kept going through the book, and he came across a little picture of himself. Right? And he goes, who's that? I said, Maharaji, it's you. Nahi, Buddha. So, yeah. And the other thing that happened, like Raghu said, I had limped into the temple in the morning with Raghu helping me walk, thinking that I was going to have to go to the hospital and get my knee attended to because it was swollen like twice as big. And we were under orders, of course, not to come until the afternoon. He wanted none of the Westerners to come until late in the afternoon. But first thing in the morning, of course, the very next day I show up with Raghu. But I just wanted him to, I wanted to say to him, I'm going to the hospital, so I probably won't see you later. So I limp in and we pranam, and he just looks at us. He doesn't say anything. So we sit down, and he just sits there for a while, not saying anything. And we figure, if he's not saying anything, I'm not saying anything. I'm going to sit here forever. So after a few minutes, he got up, and he began walking towards the back of the temple, holding Gurudat Sharma's hand, which he often did as he walked. He held somebody's hand. And as he walked further away from where he was sitting, he started leaning on Gurudat and leaning. And it looked like he was really having trouble walking, right? And I thought to myself, oh, he's taking on the karma of my knee, right? At that instant I had that thought, he turned around and literally ran back to the tucket. And he plops down, he looks at me and he said, you thought I was in pain? You wanted to help me? Good boy, good boy. So I think it was later that afternoon when the rest of the Westerners came, we were sitting around and Girija was there. And the way I remember it, of course, is that she had a Bible with her. Because like I told you the other day, that Maharaji had started talking to us about Jesus. And since none of us knew very much about Jesus, we thought, well, we ought to read that book, So he just took the book and he opened it up, he went through a few pages and he went boom. And that's when he pointed to that quotation, looking at me about the knee. Now, the only thing, I don't mind the suffering that much, but where is the abundance of revelation? That's what I'm waiting for. I mean, come on, balance it out,
Ramdas, maybe it'd be great if you could comment on the "My grace is sufficient for thee" line and what you have experienced over your lifetime and, of course, more recently with "My grace is sufficient for thee." She said briefly. I don't know why.
Briefly.
Take as long as you want.
Grace is true.
Maybe it's karma, or is it grace?
One day, Maharaji was talking about grace. And I said to him, isn't grace and karma the same thing? That means your life, your karma, but it's all grace. It's all spiritually determined. And he said, there were some people around, and he said, I won't answer that in public. So, but he went into his room and where he had Dada who Indian man, and he said, Ramdas and I understand each other. Yes. Maharaji said that. And right after I said grace and karma, that's right. Wow. That if your life is grace. There's an interesting thing. I was treating my stroke, the stroke of my body. But grace. And then Siddhima, my elder sister, in Maharaji's satsang, she said, Ramdas, you don't expect Maharaji's going to give you a stroke, do you? I've done a terrible thing. So I reasoned that the stroke was a natural occurrence and the grace was my reactions to the stroke. My reactions, positive. That was the grace. That was the grace.
I want to reflect on, actually, you tossed it off right at the end of what Ram Dass was talking about, karma and grace. and you said the two exist at once. Can you guys expand a little bit on that?
Yes.
I don't think I can expand very much.
Well, your personal experience of it.
Well, when I'm lost in my stories, and can't find any space anywhere, or any release or relief, grace is just an idea, a thought. It's not a reality. But for me, then I start singing. And immediately, the storylines just recede into the distance, and I'm sitting again with Maharaji in that presence. And then grace is the only thing that is. And in those moments, I understand that grace or presence or being surrounds us and holds us in its, like the sky holds everything in it without doing anything. And as soon as I would find a way to let go of my story, I keep seeing over and over again that grace is always here. And it includes the forgetting and the remembering. It all happens inside of presence. And when you don't remember, you just don't remember, You just, what can you do? That's why I always talk about doing practice. Because the practice is the opening of the hand to catch the raindrops, which are always falling. If you don't open the hand, you get wet, but you don't get much to drink. So, yeah.
Closer. I think there's a relationship. There is a relationship between karma and grace and love and faith. They're all kind of the same thing. I mean, there's this understanding at some level that in this great mystery of how things happen, that we're not running the show. And that was one of an aspect of the grace that Maharaji showed us from time to time. And the faith that is the case carries you through whatever you have to deal with. Sometimes, as KD says, you don't always remember. And as Ramdas has said, faith is not a belief. Maybe you want to enlarge on that?
Faith is here in the soul, and belief is a thought. A thought. And faith is so rich, rich. It is faith gives me my spiritual self. I don't have any faith in this. I get faith. When I see all of you as souls, that's when I get faith. All of us feel Maharaji in the background of our lives. There's faith in that. And if I'm having a moment and I don't quite to do what to do, I just surrender. Surrendered in Maharaji. Surrendered to His grace. He knows, he sees the big picture. And my life is safe in His hands.
The question is, what transforms suffering into grace? At least the question for the retreat. And there's a passage from the Buddhist texts where the Buddha says, just as if there were a beautiful pond with a pleasant shore, its water being clear, agreeable, cool, transparent, and a person came by scorched and exhausted by heat, fatigued, parched, and thirsty, and they would step into the pond and bathe and drink, and their plight and fatigue and feverishness are allayed. So, my friends, whenever one hears and practices the Dharma of liberation, the Dharma of awakening, hearing its words and marvelous statements, and undertaking the trainings and practices of heart and mind, all one's plight and fatigue and feverish burning of the heart are allayed, and one comes to an inner well-being and coolness that is who you really are. So there's a kind of invitation that what begins to transform the sorrows of the world is not that they go away, but when they're met with the great heart of compassion and with the eye or the understanding of wisdom, and when we have these practices and trainings that bring loving kindness and understanding again and again into the heart, then they become transformed. And it's not that you're making yourself into something. Now you become a new great spiritual person. Spare your friends and family. It is, as Ramdas said, and Trudy pointed to in the metta yesterday, it is innate to you, it is close to you as your own breath. Compassion, born into your own true nature. So my friend, the best kindergarten teacher in the world, Peggy, has a kindergarten that's also on the flight path of one of the California air bases. And, I don't know, 5-8 years ago or so, when there was the build-up to the Iraq War, remember that one? Anyway, we're a warlike nation, and we keep doing it, and we've got to kind of look at that. But anyway, the kids were out playing, and a plane flew very low, a big transport plane, over the playground. And military planes can be very loud, and they were really scared. They saw it was a military plane, and they all came running back in. Peggy, what was that? And she said it was a military transport plane. They said, well, where's it going? And she said, there might be a war soon. And they all knew. They were 5 years old, but their parents watch TV, and they talk about, should we go to war and what's happening and so forth. They said, yeah. Said, Peggy, what's on that plane? She said, well, I don't know. They said, are there bombs? Probably. Are there soldiers? Maybe. Are there guns and tanks? Yes. And then one little boy said, well, do they have kids there like us? Peggy said, they do. He said, well, they must not know that. They wouldn't send bombs there if they knew that. We have to tell them. And so they got the butcher paper and all the stuff they had, and they went on the playground, and they made a huge picture of a child. And then, Peggy, how do you spell Iraq? I-R-A-Q. And they spelled out Iraq in enormous letters, big enough so that it could be seen by the pilots from the air, so they would know that there were children there. It's in you. It's not that you have to go seeking for love or compassion. It was born in you. And yes, there are things that shut it down and scare you. You get scared. We all get scared. And so then we get in that small sense of self, the body of fear. But it's a part of you as surely as your own breath and your own name. And when you meditate then, it's not so much to have some special experience as to remember. Just to remember. So what transforms suffering is compassion, the great heart of compassion, and also wisdom, the wisdom of the Dharma, the compassion of the Dharma and the wisdom of the Dharma. And the wisdom means that there's an understanding that human incarnation is a weaving of the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows, and praise and blame and gain and loss and sweet and sour and young and old and beginnings and endings and loss and magic rebirth, that we are woven together with this fabric of appearance and disappearance. And when you understand that it's not, as Wes taught yesterday, it's not personal, it's just what human incarnation is. And the wise heart says, I wish there weren't loss, I wish there weren't pain, I wish there weren't aging and change and so forth. You might say that and then say, no, this is the curriculum, this is incarnation. You came in, it's what you get. And then the only question is, how do you work with it? So, the great violinist Yitzhak Perlman was playing in New York a concert at Lincoln Center, and Yitzhak was born around when I was in the 40s, and he got polio, and when he was like 4 or 5 years old. I got polio when I was 8 and I was 7, was thrown in the hospital, paralyzed for a couple of weeks, but somehow I got my body movement back. But anyway, he didn't. And so he walks with these leg braces and crutches. Went on to Lincoln Center to do a Beethoven violin concerto, amazing piece, New York Symphony there. And he's playing away, and somewhere in the middle of the symphony, he's playing, and there's this loud crack, a string breaks, and everything falls silent. You could hear it through the hall. And he sits quietly, and the conductor looks at him. What's he going to do, you know? Call someone on stage to restring the Stradivarius, you know, or hobble off stage and get another violin, or what? Everyone's watching. And then he nods to the conductor, continue. And those who are close enough, or those who know the art of music, could see that he continued to play the concerto on 3 strings, reconfiguring the notes so that the entire piece would come out of this violin. And when he was finished, people just sat in a kind of stunned silence and then stood up and began to cheer. And after the cheering, he kind of motioned for them to sit down and wiped his brow and quieted. And then he spoke not boastfully, but in a kind of pensive, reverent tone. And he said, you know, sometimes it's the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left. And that's it. That's us, you know. Leonard Cohen's line about we all have cracks in us, that's where the light gets in. That the wisdom of the world says this is it. It's joy, it's measure of sorrows and tears, the ocean of tears, the Buddha called it, that you carry, and the magnificent, unbearable beauty. And you open to both. Now, the question is, all right, how does one open to both? When my teacher Ajahn Chah had practiced for about 10 years in the jungles of Thailand, where I went to study in this forest monastery with him, he lived in caves and out with the tigers and did all those things that yogis of that era did. After those years, first years of his own training, he went to see the most revered meditation master of the forest tradition. Ajahn Mun was his name. And he went and he told him about his training, and he said, samadhi and vision and dissolving into light and this understanding and this insight and all the things he'd seen in his meditation. He finished his recitation, he'd made his bows and sat quietly, and Ajahn Mun reflected and he said, Cha, you've missed the point. Really? He said, missed the point. 10 years of all this hard work in the caves? He said, yeah, those are just experiences. Dissolve the body into light, go to heaven, hell experiences, pain, pleasure, insight and so forth. The only real question is, to whom do they happen? Turn your attention back and look to see what he called the one who knows. This is the witnessing, Ram Dass's loving awareness. Look to see who is knowing. It's like you're sitting in the movie, there's a romantic comedy and a war movie and a documentary and a drama of some kind, and all of a sudden somebody shifts in the seat next to you, or popcorn chews really loud, and you go, oh yeah, movie, right. You are completely lost in it. And you see the light shining, and you realize that it's not that you're in it, that it's all created from light. Oh yeah. And so Ajahn Mun was saying, look back and see who is knowing. Now you hear this and it sort of sounds esoteric in a way, right? But here's to make it simpler. When you look in the mirror, you noticed you aged, right? Face up, right? Drooping, sagging, losing its fur, whatever, various things like that. But the weird thing is that you don't feel older. You know that thing? Oh my God, look. Yeah, it's losing its fur. It's drooping over there. It's whatever. It's doing its thing, right? And that's because in that moment of looking in the mirror, you recognize that it's only your body that's aged. The mirror is a kind of spiritual practice if you use it right. You look and you say, yeah, it's drooping or getting older or sagging or whatever it's doing. But you know somehow that that's not who you are.
When we use our particular point of suffering, it can be a little suffering, like having to pee and the line is long, or a huge suffering, like losing your beloved daughter. But when we take that moment of our particular suffering and we just add the ingredient of some self-compassion and realize, oh my, this is what it feels like to be a human being who is grieving, who is hungry, who has to pee, who, whatever it might be that's happening, who's filled with love, who's filled with rage, who's filled with the idea that to have a moment of anger or hate is to fall from being a spiritual person. It's just a moment of truth. The truth of being angry, the truth of being all love, the truth of being dissolved into the gorgeousness, the unbelievable heartbreaking exquisiteness of this life. So that's something that we can always do, to use our particular, unique, individual, personal, not like anyone else's in this moment, flavor of what's happening. It doesn't have to be suffering, but it's usually at moments of suffering that the heart closes down, like Jack was talking about. We used to say you can't always breathe in. You have to breathe out. And to use that particular moment to connect with the universal, to the truth of this is what it's like for every human being who is hungry or thirsty or lost or lonesome or confused or scared, etc., etc. And then we're not isolated and separate. We're actually expanded and connected, and really connected to each other and to all of life. Another thing I wanted to remember to say to you this morning is, as we do these practices of opening the heart, of expanding so that, the whole world is our mind-heart, as we do these practices of dissolving separation between us, it's also important to know how to have some healthy boundaries between ourselves and others, between ourselves and experience. And it's always a dance. It's always a dance between understanding that we're not in this kind of separate encapsulated thought world of me in here and the objective world out there. The Buddha called that wrong view. It's not like that. The world that we perceive, so-called out there, is directly dependent on the state of our hearts and minds, right? If I am really depressed, a sunny, gorgeous day like this makes me feel worse. It just does. Anyway, you understand. It's really about understanding the truth of no separation and the truth that there is a place where I stop and you start. And this is part of the practice of equanimity too. And I'll do an equanimity meditation with you, but how do we stay connected to both truths? That's really our practice and what we're doing here over and over again. And the question of a healthy boundary comes up, for example, when somebody we love is suffering in a way that we are helpless to change. And even worse, they may be creating their own suffering through addiction or some other process of being self-destructive in ways that we who love them desperately want to help or change. And so how can we care without trying to cure right? How can we understand? One of the phrases in the classical equanimity meditation is, we say, you are the owner of your own karma, your own life situation. Your happiness or unhappiness depends on your actions, your choices, not on my wishes for you. And this isn't a cold-hearted statement of, I wash my hands of you, you know, you make your bed, lie in it. It's not that kind of statement. It's really about acknowledging, as much as I long for you to be happy, as much as I send you loving kindness, metta, compassion, joy, wishes, as much as I wish you well, I also acknowledge the limitations. This is from Mary Oliver. She's talking about an experience she has in nature. That's where she connects with universal life. But I think in some ways it's also a beautiful meditation instruction. She says, look, I want to love this world as though it's the last chance I'm ever going to have to be alive and know it. Sometimes in the late summer, I won't touch anything. Not the flowers, not the blackberries brimming in the thickets. I won't drink from the pond. I won't name the birds or the trees. I won't whisper my own name. She's that quiet. Then she goes on. One morning the fox came down the hill glittering and confident and didn't see me. The fox didn't see me, and I thought, so this is the world. I'm not in it. And it's beautiful. Of course she's there. Of course she's seeing. And of course this beautiful poem, expression of her Dharma, is being born. But that not touching anything, that quiet and still. And then she sees, and we see something wondrous, strange, sometimes weird, but we see things. And we see the world. As many of you walking outside just now saw the world in this amazing way. And why was it so exquisitely beautiful? Because the eye that wants it to be some other way, or wants it to last forever, or wants, isn't in charge in that moment. This is the world. I'm not in it. And it's beautiful. She has another one that is also like a beautiful Dharma instruction. It's really talking about that oscillation that we feel between our personal life and this universal life we share. And from the great awareness perspective, our problems are so tiny. And when there's some urgent, pressing need, it does seem to take precedence. So here she's talking about how the self can vanish into experience. For years and years, I struggled just to love my life. We can relate to that, right? For years and years, I struggled just to love my life. And then the butterfly rose weightless in the wind. Don't love your life too much, it said, and vanished into the world.
While Ram Dass teaches so much, embodies so much love and loving awareness, that also part of what makes the magic of Ram Dass's presence and teaching so compelling, you said, was his profound equanimity, that he can hear a story, a magnificent story, a beautiful story, a terribly tragic story, and say, yes, yes, this too. And to have somebody who doesn't react and take it personally and see, oh my God, the world is wrong, but to be able to rest in the place of the heart that says, yes, this too, that great equanimity transforms everything and transforms everyone that comes into that field. Now what's true is that we can easily become loyal to our suffering. You know what I mean? You can make a whole kind of living out of it in some way or other for yourself and others. But it's not the end of the path. The invitation is really to know suffering, to say yes, as Ramdas did, to find the place of equanimity that Trudy was teaching. Wes went to interview Gary Snyder recently for our journal, The Inquiring Mind. Gary's 84, Pulitzer Prize winning, amazing poet, one of the fathers of modern environmental movement. And Wes said, Gary, starting in the 50s and 60s, Earth Household, talking about the environment. And now you see climate disruption, global warming, extinction of species. What message do you have as you look out for us? And he said, don't feel guilty. Amazing message. Don't feel guilty. If you are going to save it or serve it, if you're going to save it, don't do it out of guilt or anger or rage. Save it because you love it. Because that's the only force, it's the only power that really can make a difference. Don't feel guilty. Do it out of love. And again, you look at the Dalai Lama's laughter and his joy, the Buddha's instruction. Live in joy and love even among those who hate. Live in joy, in health, even among the afflicted. Live in joy, in peace, even among the troubled. Look within, be still, free from fear and attachment. Find the sweet joy of living in the way. It's an amazing instruction. Live in joy and love even among those who hate. And I think of my teacher Mahagosananda that I worked with in the Cambodian refugee camps, and most of his family was killed. And he led for 15 years. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize many times. He led these peace walks through the killing fields of Cambodia, chanting loving kindness. And people would come, old women would come out who'd been in hiding, afraid. Soldiers would come and lay their guns at his feet and weep. And although so many people in his family had been killed, he said, the only way we can reclaim our land is through love. Come join me. Somebody came up, this soldier, the guy next to, the monk next to Thich Nhat Hanh was ringing this beautiful bell, like that Hanuman bell, and said, oh, that's so beautiful. It reminds me of peace, of what I long for. Could I have your bell? Somebody out in the bushes who'd been fighting, could I have this bell to remind me? And the monk next to Gosananda said, I'll give you this bell in exchange for your gun. And the soldier said, I would give it to you, but then I would be shot when I went back without my gun. I need it. And the monk, without skipping a beat, said, all right, I'll give you this bell for all the rounds in the chamber. And the soldier opened the gun and emptied out all the rounds. And there was this gesture, here's the bullets, and you give me the bell. A really tough poem from Jack Gilbert, one of our great poets, and tough and powerful, called A Brief for the Defense, for the lawyers among you, like my daughter who's doing human rights law these days. Sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies are not starving someplace, they're starving somewhere else with flies in their nostrils. but we enjoy our lives because that's also what the gods want. Otherwise, the mornings before lavender summer dawn would not be made so fine, and the Bengal tiger would not be fashioned orange and black, so miraculously striped. The poor women at the fountain are laughing together between the suffering they've known and the awfulness in their future, smiling and laughing while somebody in the village is very sick. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight. We can do without pleasure-seeking, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. If the locomotive of the Lord runs us down, we should give thanks that the end had magnitude. We must admit there will be music despite everything. What a line. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. Or the poet Pablo Neruda, who writes in one line, what we need to remember as we work for justice, as we care for this magnificent earth, which is us. You can pick all the flowers, but you can't stop the spring. There's a way in which these words and practices, the big sky meditation we did, or the loving kindness meditation that Trudy led, or the paired practice this morning that Mirabai led, are invitations, Ramdas keeps pointing to it, to move from here, from the discriminating mind, to love. And Raghu and I, when we were talking about it, the idea is not to perfect yourself. You've tried that for a long time, with mixed results, right? The idea is to perfect your love. And when you shift from here, which feels separate, this is who I am, that's who they are, there's a separate sense of self. The Buddha's language talks about no self, or no soul. They're really saying, let go of that sense of separateness and rest in awareness, or loving awareness, or oneness. They're languages to move us from the small sense of self, from what's called the body of fear, to that love that knows that it's us, and that nothing is born and nothing dies. We are the life itself appearing through our forms, and that it's completely trustworthy. And so that shift, when you meet a great Zen master or a wonderful lama or something, it's not very different than meeting some great swami, and one talks about soul and another one talks about no self. But the feeling is really surrender, love, a sense of grace. And I think it's just moving from the separateness to that sense beyond separateness, to awareness and love being who we are.
Remember in the poem when Mary Oliver says, this is the world, I'm not in it. It's beautiful. The one who knows that and is aware of that, that's what I understand as maybe our heart and soul.
Yeah.
Full circle to Mirabai.
Yeah. Well, we talked about separation as suffering, that when we're not, and it may not always be like deep angst, but separation from each other. Like when you glimpse it in some of these practices and so on, and you glimpse the way in which we really are not just connected, but part of the same thing, that makes you happy, because you're not feeling the separateness, and which is really what causes us to suffer. So, may you Abide in the great awareness forever and ever. When you see injustice, can you have compassion and love for the person who's responsible for this? Or do you have to be motivated by anger and other negative emotions? And the truth is, you can, it's the same thing. You can have compassion and love for that person, and at the same time, you can set limits. You can work wholeheartedly to change the actions of that person or group of people. But coming from compassion, it will sustain you much longer than anger, and it will open up possibilities that are healing all the way around. This is always the first question when we do retreats for social activists. Is it going to diminish my effectiveness, my power in the situation? Compassion never does that. Lawyers often will ask, can I have compassion for the person on the other side of the case and still be a zealous advocate for my client? The answer is yes. It does not keep you from seeing what's unjust, from seeing what kinds of limits need to be set, from finding ways to change what's going on. But it's like Mandela saying, and Gandhi, that my enemy, I have to work with my enemy. I have to have compassion and love for my enemy, even if I don't like him and I don't like anything he's doing. So I hope that helps.
Hi. This question is very similar to the one that was just asked, and I think that was led that way. But this is about suffering, and I'm just wondering, when there's people in your family that you know are suffering, and they act badly because they're suffering, and it hurts you, and it keeps you apart, how do you support their journey with compassion without being ripped apart yourself, because you wish something more for them? You wish them to be happier, to be more themselves, to be more loving, and you know it's just their journey. But I mean, what can you do?
Well, first of all, knowing it's just their journey, that is huge. To really deeply know that is enormous. And then I'm just going to tell you, this is a small suffering story, little suffering. But it was bad at the time. Whenever I would visit my mom, which was really once a year, mostly because they lived overseas and would come back once a year, the first thing she would say is, well, honey, you're such a pretty woman. Why are you wearing lavender overalls? Or, honey, you're such a... And then the criticism would come. And it was so regular and predictable, almost like stepping off the plane and touching the ground, that I decided I didn't really want that to be the ground of our relationship and the currency of our intimacy, where she says something and I think, God, I haven't even been here and I'm already annoyed. And I just told her, when you do that, it makes me want to go home, and I haven't even walked in the door yet. And so it's possible to train people by saying, it makes me not want to come visit you.
And what happened?
Oh, my mother, that was the last time it ever happened. She wasn't aware of it. She loved me. Why would I look like that? I mean, that was her compassion,
You look beautiful.
Am I gorgeous?
Well, I just want to say one little tiny thing. When Jesus went home, he had trouble with his family. When Buddha went home, he had trouble with his parents. So don't think that you're doing something wrong. That's why they call it nuclear family, right? It's part of the journey. And it is a place. Talk about fierce grace. Sometimes family, setting boundaries that need to be not even going very often, or maybe training them if you're lucky, or making them conscious. Sometimes you can't. And I had a friend who wanted to go back to her family, and they drank a lot. They watched TV, and she was trying to get them to be spiritual. I said, listen, don't go very often. Stay for a little while, have a beer, watch a couple TV shows, bless them, and get out of there,
In my long time work with people in prison, we talk a lot about karma. And it's alive for me in my life also, and you've all spoken about karma is based on intention, which I've certainly heard previously. It seems to be a subtle point, and I'd love a little clarification. For instance, my very good friend is having an affair with a married man, and she has no intention of hurting anybody. I mean, there's no intention there that is ill. Is there negative karma around that kind of thing, and why? If the intention,
yes.
If the intention, but if it is intention and the intention is pure, and she even feels like it has helped her life and helping all the people around her, I just find that interesting.
I have one quick thing you can add to it, Mirabai, from your to great wisdom. This is really important.
He means. Sorry.
That the sense of pure intention in her case is mixed with delusion or ignorance. It's not pure intention. One part of it's pure, and our intentions are often mixed. But when you see the results in cases like that very often, there will be a lot of suffering. Oh, I want to do this. I see that beautiful thing. My intention is I want to give that to somebody else. I think I'll steal it, but my intention is really pure to pass it on and so forth. There's delusion with that. There's ignorance. And so the karma that you make from intention is not only based on hatred or greed or grasping, but it's also based on not seeing clearly, which she's not, and therefore she will eventually suffer, as will the others. And then you want to have mercy and compassion for that.
Yeah, I agree. I would have said the same thing, and I just think that situations like that, or questions like this, it's helpful in that it reminds us that meditation is inquiry. It's inquiry into the nature of our intention and the nature of our actions. And we so often delude ourselves to think that, we're doing the right thing. And it's just so helpful to sit with whatever and to really see things as they are. And delusion, we all do it all the time in small and big ways. So I think her case is, that's a really good extreme example. But it's an important process because we all have like shadows on our intentions in many of our actions.
It also points to the importance of, in Sanskrit it's called shila or sila, that the foundation of the path of awakening is also non-harming yourself and non-harming others. You would know that, of course. In the simplest way, people, when they enter the temple, they'll take a kind of vows to not kill or steal or, speak falsely or cause harm to others through the misuse of their conduct, their sexuality, or whatever. In the simplest way, it's hard to meditate after a day of killing and stealing. It just doesn't work very well, or having affairs or whatever. And not to say that, again, black and white, that there's never the right place for an affair or something, but I'm not trying to be moralistic. It's what Mirabai is saying. It's actually listening to the heart. And when you understand that the ground, that your love of truth and your love of freedom is bigger than what you need or what you want, all those things are there. You say, I will not act in a way, as best as I can, that doesn't cause harm to myself or to anyone else. And then the rest of the path unfolds.